Thank you so much. So there are many things that I learned at NATO. We'll talk about some of those lessons from the military and more related to energy. But one of the most important ones that I learned was to take direction when you're given it. So I've been told 10 minutes, one idea, 5 points, and I have one idea, 10 minutes, and I'll make 5 points about it. And that one idea is that the only option to deliver European energy security is to combine renewable energy with new technology. And I'll set that up with my first point, which is really introducing the energy trilemma. And I should say, I hope by the time that I finish, it should be clear why we have Carl and I paired together, because this is all about local communities at the other end of it. And we're moving from a world of a very top-down, centralized world to a world of individual choice. And that's part of what this new technology needs to enable. But let's first talk about the energy trilemma. The energy trilemma is the idea that the energy system will struggle to balance pressure to be secure, to be decarbonized, and to be affordable. In a classic trilemma, you can have two of those outcomes, but not three. So Danny Roderick, for example, when he introduces trilemmas to explain globalization, gives the example of a dry cleaner where it can be quick and good, but it won't be cheap, or quick and cheap, but it won't be good, or good and quick, good and cheap, but it certainly won't be quick. And the idea of the energy trilemma was secure, decarbonized, affordable, pick any two. And I should say, while I'm criticizing this idea, that it was my former Shell colleagues who developed it. So it was certainly helpful to introduce something, but I think we can go further because reality is more complex. I often find my dry cleaning is slow, expensive, and poorly done, and energy is equally complicated. In energy, the trilemma is actually overly optimistic. If I put my hat on as an energy security professional, since 1973 and the first Arab oil embargo, Europe and the world more generally has failed to achieve energy that's affordable and secure. And that's long before decarbonization was a mainstream concern. So while we talk about a trilemma, in actual fact, the situation is much more difficult than the trilemma would suggest. First point. Second point, instead of introducing a trilemma in already a difficult circumstance between affordability and security, I would argue that renewable energy now provides the opportunity actually to resolve that original dilemma and give us an energy system that's both affordable and secure. Why? To explain why, let me go back a ways. So for the first 300 million years of humanity's existence, economic growth on our planet was approximately zero. Economic activity was constrained by how much solar energy the planet could capture as it passed through the atmosphere and dissipated into entropy out in the cosmos. And that was how we sustained ourselves as humanity for our first 300 million years. Then, in the 18th century, we began to burn fossil fuels. And suddenly economic growth tilted sharply upwards, because now not only could we use the energy that was currently passing through the atmosphere, but also the energy that the biosphere had captured in the past as it passed through the atmosphere and dissipated into entropy. And economic growth tilted sharply upwards again 138 years ago with the invention of AC electricity by William Stanley, Nikola Tesla, and George Westinghouse. And that AC electricity system made cheap power now available to anyone with a plug socket. Prior to electrification, using fossil fuel energy required large and complex machinery to do work beyond simply providing light and heat. But AC electricity meant that for the first time in that 300 million years of human history, an individual person could benefit from the augmented work of a machine in their home. And since the AC system was introduced, our economy has grown 14 times, our consumption of electricity has grown 14 times, and we've lifted billions and billions of people out of poverty. Unfortunately, that system relied on fossil fuels. And fossil fuels weren't well distributed globally, causing the energy security problems that certainly kept the first half of my career busy many sleepless nights. And they also caused climate change. So we now need to move to new technologies, renewables, and in some places, nuclear. Third point, the AC system was based on the assumption that large fossil fuel generators would provide both power and system stability, because in an AC system, you need to match supply and demand in real time. I think we take this for granted. We assume when we turn on the plug socket, electrons come out, and that happens on demand. And when we think about generating power, we think about moving electrons to march along a wire. But in actual fact, what a big thermal power plant does is as much about balance and stabilize the system so it can operate as it is about generating that primary power. The logic of that AC system is now broken down in terms of both climate change and energy security. Renewables, from an energy security perspective, remove the need to rely on imported fossil fuels to generate primary power, but they only provide primary power. They don't provide system stability. Renewable generation varies with the weather, so it doesn't match demand by definition. And nuclear generation, although we talk about nuclear as reliable baseload, is continuous but inflexible, so it also doesn't match demand. If you talk to the National Grid Control Room, once upon a time, life was much simpler. They'd watch the football on TV. The referee would add 3 minutes of added time. They'd call the power plant and tell them to start shoveling coal, because in 3 minutes, people would open their refrigerators and we could manually match supply and demand. It no longer works that way. Third point. That brings me on to the fourth point, which is that the cost of renewable energy is rapidly falling. We hear this all the time from politicians, and it's true. The wholesale cost of energy from solar is the marginal cost is zero, and the wholesale cost is rapidly approaching zero. But the cost of energy to the consumer is rising. For the first time a few weeks ago, the International Energy Agency, the European Investment Bank, and the European Central Bank met together. And the head of the European Investment Bank said from one sentence to the next, the cost of renewable energy is going to zero, but we have to protect the consumer. Why do we have this problem that energy costs are rising and yet the cost of renewable energy is falling? It's because of that difficulty of maintaining the system. The more stable system, the more renewable energy we have, the less we can dispatch, the less we can call on power plants, the more difficult and expensive it is to make sure supply and demand match in real time. So we have a resource, renewable energy, that removes us from one energy security concern, imports, but now exposes us to a new energy security concern, system stability. Today, we have 3 ways to solve this problem. Number one, we can continue to maintain dispatchable generation in our mix, power plants we can call on. Today, we like to claim that they're renewable by burning wood instead of coal, but fundamentally, it's the same thing. We take some biomass and we burn it in a power station when we need more power. We also have new mechanisms. In the UK, we have more and more new equipment like batteries that can store and release energy in order to balance the system. The problem with introducing something like batteries is that now I'm paying the capital cost of the generation and I'm paying a separate capital cost for the stabilization. So I need two technologies that both cost money to do what the generator by itself did in the old system. And that raises questions of actually, can we execute this transition successfully? But fortunately, we have a third option, which is what I certainly devote my time to now. And I hope that Carl can help us understand some of the community aspects of this, which is we can make demand more flexible. Historically, we assumed that we would use energy however we wanted, and we'd adjust generation. But we today can make demand more flexible, and we can do it in 2 ways. One, which has gained a lot of press in the UK recently, in the trials with Octopus, is we can incentivize people to change how they use their energy in their home, or how businesses use their energy. That has some promise, but it also has limitations, because we don't consume energy in order to balance the system. We consume energy to do work. That amazing thing of plugging in a machine and having it do work for you in your home. But there's certainly scope around that. And the other thing we can do, which is where I focus my time, is on changing the nature of the energy grid in order to make it inherently more flexible, so we can balance supply and demand with a system with 100% renewable energy. So point 5, the future solution to European energy security, in my view, is that we move to a system that removes our reliance on imports, that electrifies our economy, that relies on domestic renewable energy for primary power, but we at the same time put in place a policy framework, a set of incentives, an economic framework that really enables us to leverage new and emerging technologies to stabilize the grid through managing demand and make that renewable energy not only cheap, but also secure. And doing this really requires building local community relationships to understand how does each community want to manage energy, and moving from a system that goes from top down to a system that's actually much more democratized and facilitates innovation at the edge and platforms to coordinate local energy choices rather than control rooms to direct how the system operates. That's my one thought. Renewables will deliver European energy security, my 5 points on how it happens, and my contribution to Liverpool's high five to the world.